Sound the alarms, everybody. A blockbuster trade is official. The Vikings have acquired Herschel Walker. I'm here to break it all down on Locked On Vikings.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who come and listen every single day, whether you're on your way to work or whatever. I appreciate you giving me your time. For everybody else, if you're new here, hello, my name is Luke. You can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is an audio listening place at the SiriusXM app, or you can find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And boy, howdy, Mike Lynn, Jerry Burns, and the Minnesota Vikings are on one, spending a whole bunch of draft picks to get an in-season acquisition of running back Herschel Walker. We've been talking about it on this show. The Vikings have been a running back away, with Tommy Kramer hopefully staying healthy this season. Guys like Ahmad Rashad and even Anthony Carter absolutely popping off the last couple of years. The Vikings have always seemed like they've been in this rut of being able to make the playoffs, but they can't get past the 49ers. Yeah, they did the one time, but that was obviously a fluke. And the blowout they suffered at the hands of the 49ers in the playoffs last year, that feels a little bit more like it's real. But hey, with Herschel Walker and a hard-nosed running game and a little bit more ground control, they might be able to keep Joe Montana and Jerry Rice off the field if they do meet those guys in the playoffs again in the 1989 season. So here's to hoping. But I'm here to break down the terms of the Herschel Walker trade as well as some of the other implications. And thankfully, thanks to, we'll say, an inside source from a faraway land, I have a little bit of the background story, a little bit of insider information on this trade for you. So buckle on up. It starts in Dallas, where they're 0-5. And obviously they're in the midst of a deep rebuild. New head coach Jimmy Johnson might not even survive the year. I'm kind of surprised they let him do this. But they have Herschel Walker and like dudes, right? Like they don't have a team at all around Herschel Walker right now. And it makes sense that they're just trying to like amass some capital and settle in for the long haul rebuild. So I guess if you're a Cowboys fan, then, get ready for some rough seasons and we'll see if it even works out. But what my insider was able to tell me was that Jimmy Johnson wasn't even trying to trade Herschel Walker to the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings swept in and took him. They had started talks with the Cleveland Browns instead of us. The Cowboys were trying to trade him to Cleveland, and they only really called Minnesota because they were just trying to drum up some competition, just trying to get the rumor out there. Hey, a lot of teams are vying for Herschel Walker. Get the Schefter tweet out there. Teams are trying to, right? It would be like a Diana Rossini move, right? Teams are trying to trade for Herschel Walker, trying to drum up some of that value. But in talking to Mike Lynn and the Minnesota Vikings, they found a team that actually kind of felt like things were slipping away. Look, the Vikings are on a 3-game losing streak right now. They are on the cusp of losing what is supposed to be a Super Bowl window. After that 1987 season, that the strike, the glory of making it to the NFC Championship game, they have this idea that they're really close, that they can be one of the powers of the NFC if they just add one more hit of juice. And that hit of juice is Herschel Walker, the former the face of the USFL, who then, after the USFL went belly up, has been playing for the Cowboys, best running back in the league. I mean, they could not have added a player at a position of need. Darren Nelson, controversial figure. I get it after 87. And now they replace him with the class of football, the class of the sport worldwide. How could you not be so excited? So here are the terms of the trade. I hope you don't like draft picks because you're not getting any for a while. They traded 5 players and 3 draft picks. They traded a first-round pick next year and a second-round pick next year and a 6th-round pick next year, as well as 5 players. So we're doing a 5-for-1, but obviously none of these players move the needle too much. It's Darren Nelson goes back the other way. Alex Stewart on the edge, Isaac Holt, the cornerback, David Howard, and Jesse Solomon. So a couple of linebackers there too. All role players, but nobody that is going to change the face of the Dallas Cowboys the way that Herschel Walker is changing the face of the Vikings right now. And then there are some conditions here. If these players just basically have to be on the team next year. If they are not, then the Vikings will give up more draft picks. So like if they cut Jesse Solomon, the Vikings give up a first-round pick to like replace that in 1991, a first-round pick in 1992 that's conditional on Isaac Holt, a second-round pick in 91 that's conditional on David Howard, a second-round pick in 92 that's conditional on Darren Nelson, and then a third-round pick in 92 that's conditional on Alex Stewart. So I know that's a little bit like convoluted, but basically the way you need to understand is it's a bunch of role players and a couple of draft picks for Herschel Walker. This changes the face of the Vikings. It changes their offense. He's going to even return kickoffs and everything. And with the game coming up against the Green Bay Packers in primetime, we're going to have a great opportunity to show exactly what this team in its Super Bowl window can come up with. I know that this is a trade the likes of which have nothing really like this has happened before, but I think that's what you kind of have to be. Look, the Vikings are a long way past the glory days of the 1970s. They are not a team that you can just kind of make tiny little tweaks here and there and then assume that they're going to be in it every single year anymore. The playoff format is bigger. There are more good teams in the NFC. There are more good teams in the division, obviously. I mean, you've got the Bears, you've got the Packers on the rise. You even have the Lions on the rise. Not to mention, we never really know what we can expect from the Buccaneers. So there's a lot that can mess with you in a given season. And I think the best way to approach that is just full on brute force with as many super studly stars as you can possibly get. I don't see how this team doesn't absolutely explode from here. This is exactly the juice that this team needed as their season was starting to circle the drain. It was promising, and it's promising again. That's something I think we can all be really, really excited about. So look, there's a lot more to talk about here. So we're going to get into if the Vikings actually can contend for the Super Bowl this year, as well as, what happens at all those other positions that, we lost starters for and stuff. So we still have a whole bunch more to talk about here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. The season rolls on, and with it, roll on your grambles. It's time to talk about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And at America's #1 sportsbook, you can gamble on all sorts of things, whether it's basketball games, hockey games. You can gamble on the ALCS between the Athletics and the Blue Jays, maybe some Ricky Henderson or Dave Stieb props. You can find anything there at FanDuel. And if you're new, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. And right now, you can make any bet that wins, a $5 bet, any $5 winning bet, and you can get $200 back in bonus bets just for going to FanDuel.com/lockedon and winning your first $5 bet. So go find something easy and get that $200 in bonus bets. That is at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, go check out the Locked On Minnesota Sports 24/7 YouTube streaming channel. They're talking about everything Minnesota sports on there, including this show, but we've got Golden Gophers, we've got Timberwolves, we've got North Stars, we've got Twins, everything, just not the Lakers, because we don't respect teams that leave Minnesota. You can find that at YouTube. Just search out Locked On Minnesota Sports and go to the live page on youtube.com. Let's move on here with the Herschel Walker trade. And while we were away, I got a little bit of news. things have changed a little bit. So, my insider has told me that Mike Lynn has a different understanding of the deal than he had before, which is interesting to say the least. But basically what has happened here is those conditional picks that were tied to players, it appears the Dallas Cowboys weren't really interested in those players at all, and they only wanted the picks. But instead of just trading all of those picks, which I don't think Mike Lynn would have agreed to, they traded them in this sort of abundantly convoluted way and then used the pressure of that situation to make Mike Lynn say yes to the deal. So here's what's happening. The Dallas Cowboys are cutting Jesse Solomon, David Howard, Isaac Holt, and Alex Stewart after the season. Their conditions will not be met, so they will instead be awarded the picks from the Minnesota Vikings. All of these picks are happening. Darren Nelson said, no, I don't want to play for the Cowboys at all. He got traded to San Diego. In terms of realizing this, basically once Jimmy Johnson benched Jesse Solomon, it was pretty clear that they weren't going to do what the Vikings assumed they would do, which was take the 3 picks and then use the players to kind of start their rebuild. No, they're getting rid of those players and they're just taking the picks instead. And those players do not revert to the Minnesota Vikings. They're just free agents now. So we kind of lose them either way. So Jesse Solomon, David Howard, Isaac Holt, and Alex Stewart will become free agents after the season. Darren Nelson is a San Diego Charger now. And the Minnesota Vikings give the Dallas Cowboys 3 first-round picks, one in 90, 91, and 92, as well as 3 second-round picks, one in 90, 91, and 92, and a 3rd and a 6th, just for good measure. And in a slightly altered deal, the Cowboys are going to give back a couple of 3rd-round picks, one in 91 and 91, a 10th-round pick in 1990, and a 5th-round pick, which is what San Diego gave up for Darren Nelson. So a slightly altered deal, but the headline here is 3 firsts and 3 seconds, some late-round swappage for Herschel Walker. Now, here's the thing. Who needs those picks, right? The Vikings are a contender built to win now. And, they're going to have a stranglehold on the division with a couple of key wins here. So, look, I'm not panicking. Are you panicking? I'm not panicking, okay? We're not panicking. But it is perhaps a bit alarming that Mike Lynn didn't really know what he was signing up for here, and that the terms of the trade have changed thus. The other thing that is going to be a little bit interesting is that this roster is complete. And with the exception of guys like Scott Studwell at 35, this roster is all in its 20s and able to compete for a long time, well past when those draft picks would come and go. They'll have to figure out kind of what to do at linebacker long term after they gave up 2 linebackers in this one. But it's not like they were going to miss Darren Nelson now that Herschel Walker's in the building. They still have Chris Dolman and Keith Millard. And they still have guys, those cornerstone defenders in the secondary like Joey Browner and Carl Lee. There's still a lot to like about this Vikings roster. And look, Tommy Kramer might come back before the season ends as he's dealing with an injury. And who's to say he won't get injured in future seasons and everything? I know that that's a difficult sell. He's been hurt like 5 times, but even without him, you got Wade Wilson doing 270 a game. You have all kinds of things to love here about the future of the Vikings as well as the present for the Vikings, but that doesn't mean we need to mince words. That means that the Vikings are in a Super Bowl window right now, and that is their situation, that the future of the Vikings has essentially been mortgaged to go all in right now. And after 1989, if things don't go well, they're going to fall apart, and that's the risk that Mike Lynn has taken here. In 90, 91, those are going to be just kind of dead years, which would be a bummer with how old Jerry Burns is. Who knows how many more years he has in him before he retires. And come 1992, 93, 94, it's really difficult to see exactly where the Vikings will be at all. Whether it's a good situation or a bad one, there's just too much mystery to it. Things could change a lot, right? But right now, this is the moment. So if you're the Minnesota Vikings, if any of the Minnesota Vikings of 1989 are listening to me, this is the moment when you have to nut up. You have to be able to take this as the inspiration, the shot in the arm, go stick it to a divisional rival, rescue your season and go win the dang NFC Central like you were destined to and like you have so many times before, so easily before. And the real test is if and when they run up against the San Francisco 49ers, and looking at how their season is going, they'll probably have to travel. Can you go into San Francisco and beat those 49ers? And if not, then yeah, this whole thing probably goes down as a catastrophic failure. But you have to understand the dynamics that led to it, as well as the difference in situation that we're working with here. So, hey, look, good luck, Minnesota Vikings. Next up, we are going to wait about 35 years, and then we'll circle back. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is online therapy made easy, and you know me, I am a big proponent of finding a way to get into therapy, and taking down some of the barriers that especially can stop guys from getting into it is really important to me. Things like just not knowing when to schedule it, or just not really understanding how you're supposed to get started with something like that, or maybe even what it's for. And for me, therapy has been, for the last few years, a maintenance thing as much as anything. If I am having a problem, it's great to have somebody to talk to, but sometimes you're just keeping up with the Joneses, and having that regularity in my life has been like a really important, like, anchoring factor. But whatever therapy is for you, with BetterHelp, it's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited entirely to your schedule. And they will try to hook you up with a therapist that's right for whatever your needs are. And if you don't like it, that's fine. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So find your social sweet spot with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So thank you for stepping into the time machine with me. I think in YouTube comments and in Twitter discussion stuff, I've seen just about every day that if the Vikings make this big trade up for a quarterback, that it's Herschel Walker trade part 2. So what a great time to take a glance back into the past as to what exactly happened there and how it all went down. And there are so many things that are different, but, you know, look, if the Vikings trade a lot of picks for a player, it must be a Herschel Walker thing, is about as far as that logic goes. And as soon as you think about it for like 2 more seconds, you start to see all kinds of really, really distinct and important differences. For one, it's a mid-season trade that happened on a really fast clock. There's a total difference in where the 89 Vikings felt that they were versus where the 2024 Vikings feel that they are. It's a different guy. It's a veteran, established, bona fide superstar. I mean, this was Adrian Peterson in his prime back then, or at least that's the way that he was viewed, as the guy in the league, one of the upper echelon, right? And instead, the Viking, and now it's a rookie quarterback who everybody accepts comes with unknowns, even, at the very, very top as of Caleb Williams and Daniels and May. Everybody still understands, hey, kind of not that likely that all 3 of those guys actually work out the way we think. It's actually pretty likely that one of those guys surprises us and busts out horribly. It's just how the draft works. Versus Herschel Walker, where everybody kind of understands exactly who he is and how good he is, and he's been that good for a long time. It's 2 teams in totally different spots. There's so many different things. So it's worth looking at that comparison, I guess, because of course that mistake harmed the Vikings for a decade, and you could still argue that they haven't gotten over it, right? But I know some of you at home haven't gotten over it, but it's not the same at all. It's not the same. So relax, all right? Ooh, deep breath. It's okay. It's not the same thing. The biggest difference to me, and maybe this is the most concrete, is that the Vikings just aren't going to pay as much for this quarterback as the Vikings of '89 did for Herschel Walker. They paid more than we will pay, almost certainly. I say almost because I don't know the exact terms of the trade, but the Vikings gave up 5 players. These were Devy guys. These were, this was Jesse Solomon. This was, Isaac Holt, but that was a starter, right? Darren Nelson was a starter who you're then like ostensibly upgrading on. Those were, that was part of your roster in the middle of a season. That won't happen here. I think it's very unlikely that a player is part of this trade with either it's New England or Arizona or Washington or whatever happens. Seems very unlikely that it's a player involved or multiple players are involved in the trade. But even if you ignore that and say, well, those players didn't really matter much because they weren't the principal starters, like I was talking about 35 years ago, even just the picks, it's super unlikely that the Vikings will give up more than they gave up then. Because the Vikings ended up, when all was said and done, giving up 3 firsts, 3 seconds, and then some. So if the Vikings give up their first round picks in the next 3 years, and 11 and 23, so 4 first round picks in total, that's 3 firsts and 2 seconds, because that was like the terms of the Texans trade. 3 firsts, 2 seconds versus 3 and 3, right? So they'd have to give up 4 first round picks and another second round pick in 2026. Yes, that is legal to do. They could do that. I'm not a reporter. I'm not going to tell you, but the reporting that we have seen from credentialed reporters seems to imply it won't be far off of that, but it's not going to be that. And yeah, they got they gave up a 3rd rounder in 92 to get 3rd rounders in 90 and 91. So they kind of moved a 3rd rounder up and then got an extra one back, like that kind of thing. But that's very much a drop in the bucket, right? With all the like late round pick swapping. There's like a 10th round pick in there. We don't even have those, right? So the real, I think, difference here, even if you say, okay, yeah, but that's still like a lot. So it's only 80% of this most horrific thing that's ever happened to the Vikings. And you go like, hooray, right? But here's another big reason why this is not the Herschel Walker trade part 2. Mike Lynn didn't know what he was doing. Not in like the colloquial, oh, he's such an idiot. He literally did not understand what he was agreeing to. He didn't get it. He thought that the Cowboys were going to take those players and rebuild around those players. They just cut him and took the pick. So he thought he was giving up a few role players, a few Patrick Joneses, and 3 first round picks for Herschel Walker, when he was really giving up 6 top 100 picks for Herschel Walker. He did not realize that was, he would not have agreed to that if he knew that that's where they were going. And the reason that happened is, one, because I still genuinely think Mike Lynn is the most incompetent person to ever walk in or out of the Vikings building. But for 2, worst thing to happen to the Vikings, I will defend that to the death. For 2, he was rushed. And the way that it went down was, the Cowboys called the Vikings just hoping to get the word out and not really thinking the Vikings would be a serious suitor for Herschel Walker. But then Mike Lynn said, heck yeah. Oh my God, I'm so in. Let's get this done. Let's get this done really fast. And Jimmy Johnson made up a deadline. The deadline, and he admitted this in a 30 for 30 later, that he did that just to put pressure on Mike Lynn and said, okay, here's the deal. It's insane. It's pages and pages and pages. It's insanely convoluted because there's all these conditions on play time and if they get cut and blah, 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 blah. And if it's a player and a pick and all that, get it to me literally by like the strike of midnight tonight. Like they were on that fast of a clock. So Mike Lynn took it out of a sense of panic. And I don't usually like to use the word panic because it implies a lack of preparation, like a panic draft pick. No, they know exactly what they're looking at here. They know the decision that they're making. They're not going, whoa, we didn't know this situation could happen, especially in the first round. Like, you go over every permutation. You spend months doing mocks on mocks on mocks and sims on sims with everybody, pretending to be other teams and trade scenarios and what's the worst case and the best case and all. They'd spend forever going over that. They're not panicking. They're just doing something you didn't consider before. This was panic. This was middle of the season. The Vikings are on a 3-game skid. The Cowboys are 0-5, and the quarterback is hurt. Tommy Kramer was hurt again when this happened. And not only that, but the papers were going crazy in a scandal of Joey Browner and a bunch of other players accusing Mike Lynn of racism. So they had like this other like drama going on, this other thing that like preferential treatment for white players, I think is what it was. There was so much going on in this late 80s thing that felt like everything was totally slipping away and falling apart. And it was, and I don't think Mike Lynn could do anything about it, but this is what he tried to do about it. That caused this trade to genuinely be I don't think that anything can be worse than this ever again. I'm not like a can't get worse guy. Like I know my Vikings, they can always make it worse. Like that, I've learned this, okay, that it can always get worse beyond your imagination. But something like this in this day and age, with as much scrutiny as is on everything that goes on in the league right now, is not possible again. if you see Kwesi make this trade, and let's say it is 4 first-round picks up to pick 3 for Drake May, and it's, 11, 23, a 2025 first, and a 2026 first, right? 4 first-round picks for Drake May, straight up, nothing back. A, that's less than the Herschel Walker trade, and B, it is made of the soundest mind. Kwesi is also approaching other teams and saying, I will offer you this. Whereas Mike Lynn was approached. He was the one Jimmy Johnson called around and was the first one to broach the idea. And Mike Lynn didn't really think about it. Kwesi has had months to sleep on this, to think about this. If only just to ease the panic of this being like some super, short-sighted and ill thought out move. You can disagree with their thought process, but you must acknowledge that there has been a thought process and that Kwesi read the trade. And just by those 2 facts, that he knows what it is and that he has spent some time thinking about it, it's not the Herschel Walker trade. It's cheaper anyways, and it's for a quarterback instead of a running back. So if you really want to come into, come into a conversation and say it's Herschel Walker 2.0, just know you're being pretty ahistorical and pretty egregiously wrong. Tomorrow is Twitter Tuesday, so get me your questions, whatever they're about. I'll answer as many as I can. You can get them to me in the Google form in the show notes or email me at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com or just look out on Twitter. I'll usually put a call out. I will see you all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.